Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Welcome, dear listener, to Kardec Radio. We're here live from the Chantilly studios at Kardec Radio. And today, we're going to talk about death. A little bit about Death Cafe, but you know what? Unfortunately, because the founder, John Underwood, is in England, we had some technical issues with his interview, so we won't be able to talk to him here today. But we will reschedule for another day for sure. For today, we're going to be here with Kirsten DeMello. Kirsten DeMello and I will be discussing a lot about the Spiritist view on death. And you can participate wherever you are in the world. If you're here live today, you can talk to us by calling 858-769-4705. It's a toll-free number. Or you can go to Blog Talk Radio chat room at Kardec Radio and talk to us as well. We'll be happy to hear from you because it's going to be kind of a virtual Death Cafe for us. And if you want to know what it is, we're going to talk about it very soon. Let us open the line and talk to Kirsten DeMello. Hi, Kirsten. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Vanessa. Hi, good morning, Vanessa. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you know, we wish we could talk to John Underwood, but we have to reschedule. We just got his message today. He's going to be able to do it some other time. But, well, we're going to talk about a little bit this and other things as well, Kirsten. You know, when we talk about death yesterday, I don't know if you probably had a chance to see a video clip of a man, I don't even remember his name, and I apologize. He's a Spiritist scholar and philosopher in Brazil. He was being interviewed on a Spiritist radio program in Brazil, and he died right there, as if he were just, going to sleep. Have you had a chance to watch it?
No, I have not. That sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was quite interesting because he was talking to the director of the Rede Boa Nova and the TV Mundo Maior in Brazil, which are Spiritist radios and TV in Brazil. And as he was talking about death, he was talking about God, and God is an idea. And then he looks at the interviewer, Jeter Giacomini, and he says, "Oh, I am going up." And his head falls down on the table, and he dies. Just like that. As if he's going to fall asleep. Unbelievable. Right?
Oh.
Yeah, it was like amazing. And then Jeter, the director in the interview at the time, later he's interviewed about the very event. And he says, you can tell by the interview, he was very happy. He was uplifted about, talking the things you were talking about. And he discarnated just like that, as easy as it sounds. But we know not every death is just like that. There are so many differences. And we're going to talk a little bit about this today, Kirsten. I would like just to kickstart the program by playing a message that Chico Xavier received and is published in the book and CD Enlightening Messages, which can be bought at the bookstore of the Spirit Side of Baltimore. Let us listen to this, Kirsten, and after the break, we'll start our conversation, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Vito's Farewell. It is full moon at the shack where he lives. Vito dies, very old, while staring at the hills. His prayer sounds like the bark of the dog whining among the trees. Poor friend who is dying without help, he cries remembering the corn in the mill. He carries 80 years of tears in the carcass now thrown on the bare floor. Sweating, he sees a young man at the door. "I am a leper," he informs in a light voice. But the young man, surrounded in a golden light, replies, "Vito, I am Jesus, "Come with me." And the old man leaves his bodily wounds to enter a chariot of bright stars.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Getting to the Light, Spiritist Therapy for Discarnate Spirits is a small book that offers guidance to Spiritist practitioners and Spiritist counselors. Purchase your copy at www.ssbaltimore.org.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
If you missed out on a previous shows, no worries. We have an on-demand section of all previous shows and interviews. Go to our website at www.kardecradio.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Help prevent suicide by reading and sharing these books with others. 2 great books are available to help in this Kardec Radio campaign to prevent suicide. Suicide, All You Need to Know, by the international Spiritist speaker Richard Simonetti. You can buy your copy at www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com. Also, Memoirs of a Suicide by the medium Yvonne Pereda. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Kardec Radio now offers more programs during the week and weekends. Every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can follow the beautiful program God at Home with Francisca Kranz and the British Spiritist community. They will brighten your days by doing a God at Home meeting wherever you are in the world, while teaching you how to do the same in your own home with your family and friends. Every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you will hear incredibly inspirational Spiritist talks directly broadcasted by Spiritist Network. They will be true educational moments to carry out to immortality. Every Saturday, live interviews, Bridging Health and Spiritism with the host Dr. Vanessa Anceloni. You may ask questions to the interviewed guests by calling 858-769-4705. And every Sunday, tune in to Spiritist Awareness at Kardec Radio. You will hear a series of segments on a diversity of Spiritist topics. Kardec will broadcast the Spiritist Moment with Kirsten DeMello, the reading of the Spiritist book by John DeRosa and Steve Shepard, Spiritism in Your Life with Drs. Marco and Joyce Magalhães, Spiritism and the Gospel with Luis Sergio Marotta, Spiritist Education for Youth and Children with Bernadette Leal, Spiritist Music with James Marotta, Neuroscience and Spiritism with Dr. Vanessa Anceloni, and many more segments coming soon. Enjoy it all and nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we're here to talk about life and death. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about Death Café. And as we said before, we had technical issues, with the interview of John Underwood, the founder of the Death Café. But since he's in England, we're going to have to reschedule his interview, which is not a big deal. But we look forward to that. And in the meantime, we have this delightful conversation with Kirsten DeMello. Hi, Kirsten. So,
hey,
Kirsten,
Vanessa.
Before we go into the discussion, I'd like to mention this new campaign that we started at Kardec Radio, the Gospel Faves, and asking people to talk about the favorite passages of the Gospel according to Spiritism, since it is, we're celebrating 150 years of the publishing of the book. I don't know what is your favorite passage, but for me, I would like to share briefly. for me, my preferred passage of the gospel is the message, the individual in the world. In the chapter Be Perfect, which is chapter 17 of the Gospel According to Spiritism. And I explain why I like this very much. Because though it talks to us about, purifying our thoughts and feelings, it has this beautiful passage, this excerpt that says, "Do not imagine, therefore, that in order to live in constant communication with us, to live in the Lord's sight, that you must put on the cilice and cover yourselves with ashes. No, no, at once, no more, no. Be happy in accordance with the needs of humankind, but may your happiness never hold a thought or commit an action that might offend God or anything that might cloud the face of those who love and guide you. God is love, and He blesses all of those who love virtuously," a protector spirit. And I like this very much, especially this chapter, because here they talk about, Kirsten, how to be, a progressing spirit, but living in the world without, isolating ourselves, without creating separation between us and everyone else in the world. So it's very beautiful because it's down to earth, and it tells us that we need to grow inside. It's more about the inner transformation than any external appearance of what we actually profess inside of our own minds. Do you, by any chance, Kirsten, have a preferred passage of the Gospel According to Spiritism?
There's nothing like a little bit of pressure to get our minds going, right, Vanessa? Actually, there is a favorite passage, and I would say, forgive me for not knowing where it is exactly, and even the exact phrase, but it was a phrase that we had printed out many years ago and had carried it with me for many years ago, and it basically talks about love and that we should put our investments in things that do not rust, rather things that are eternal, and that is what matters the most. And actually, as you're speaking, I was trying to find the actual text that is somewhere located on my laptop. Mm-hmm. There's a very beautiful text, and at a young age we had found it, and it resonated because it seemed to be much like many texts in the gospel, which are very universal, and that could apply to so many different things. That this idea of investing ourselves into things that are eternal and immortal and that is uplifting is always a source of comfort and always a source of hope, which is sort of what the gospel is to us and probably to many people, if not everybody who reads it, that it is a source of hope and enlightenment, and that as we continue to speak, perhaps by the end of this talk, I can actually find it and so people can go and read it, but it is quite uplifting and enlightening. I would say that's my favorite.
Yeah, that is really something. I mean, this book is fantastic and a book that we really should pay attention to, and I know the Spirit Society of Baltimore is going to start the systematic study of the Gospel According to Spiritism on March 13th, right?
Yes. Actually, Vanessa, I found the actual quote, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It's in the Gospel. I don't have the actual page, but it's from a protector spirit, and I'll read it. It's just very short, if I may read it. That's okay?
Yes, sure.
It says, if you have love, you have everything there is to be desired on the earth. You possess the most excellent pearl that neither circumstances nor the evils of those who hate and persecute you will be able to take away. If you have love, you will have put your treasure where worms and rust cannot reach it, and you will see everything that might stain its purity erased from your soul. You will feel the weight of matter grow lighter day by day, and like a bird soaring in the sky with no memory of earth, you will ascend without ceasing. You will ascend forever until your exhilarated soul satiates itself with life in the bosom of the Lord. The Protector Spirit, Bordeaux, 1861.
Wow. I mean, this book is fascinating, Kirsten, because I find that in each and every passage, we find, true opportunities to understand more about our own minds, ourselves. So it's really a book that is above and beyond any restricted religious book. It's about a book of the human mind. So we want to share with the listener, if you have a favorite passage of the Gospel According to Spiritism, write to us. We're going to share it with the listeners because it's the whole year. We're going to do this throughout the year. Each and every program, we're going to share favorite passages of yours, dear listener, of the Gospel According to Spiritism. So now, Kirsten, we're going to talk about life and death. Before the break, we were listening to a message that was psychographed by Chico Xavier entitled Vito's Farewell, which was published in the book and CD Enlightening Messages. And there we find a man who was a leper. He discarnated, and then he saw Jesus, and Jesus came to his rescue. But we know, Kirsten, that death is maybe a different passage for each and every person, according to Kardec, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
No, and then, this type of discussion, Kirsten, is something that people do at Death Cafes. We're not going to discuss too deeply about it, but if people want to go to deathcafe.com, it's quite interesting. John Underwood was the first one to put together these groups of people who want to talk about death, not necessarily to preach or teach this or that viewpoint about death, but just to make people feel at ease when they talk about death. And as Joanna De Angelis says, we should think about death at least once a day. I bet for the very men who had, it seems that the man I mentioned, before the break, the Spiritist philosopher who died on air in a Spiritist program in Brazil a few days ago, he seemed to be so much at ease in that moment of transition because his eyes were at peace, and he recognized that he was passing on. He even announced, "Now I'm passing on," but he was so tranquil that we think, like, is it possible that we can achieve this tranquility? What are the possible rules, the spiritual laws of life that regulate, if I may say this way, the passage of life, the life in the physical body to life in the spiritual body?
It's an interesting question to ask, Vanessa. And we would say his death, in some way, it seems as though obviously the spirits probably planned that out so perfectly, because in some way it sort of makes light of passing on. It almost seems kind of funny in a sense, although we don't like to look at death. It seems almost offensive if we look at life in a funny way. But there almost seems to us like there's an inclination to laugh a little bit, because if we can imagine someone saying, "Okay, guys, time to go. I got to rise up. I have to pass on," and boom, he just leaves. It seems almost comical, as if it's out of a movie. But, in fact, in the literature, in Spiritism, they tell us that on higher worlds, this issue of death doesn't exist as it exists here on Earth, which makes sense. We are much more attached to the material things, to people and things, so death for us is horrible, it's scary, and it's difficult for us. But the way and manner in which this man died is kind of ideal, that we simply bid those around us farewell and we move on. And that is a characteristic of a spirit, right, who is much more evolved, right?
Oh, yes, for sure. And I recall that in the Heaven and Hell book, Kardec mentions there is a chapter, which is chapter 1 of part 2, as you know, and he says the following here. that actually many people do not dread death in itself. What they dread is the instant of transition. And especially if they suffer, they want to know, am I going to suffer? And what actually happens? And as you said, it varies according to the state of evolution, our state of evolution. And it's quite interesting. I love this chapter 1 and part 2 of the Heaven and Hell book, because it talks about, as he says, the multitude of gradations of death. The fact that, death is one thing, discarnation is another. Death is the moment in which the body shuts down, but discarnation is actually the detachment of the spirit through the perispirit and the body. And he talks about how this disengagement of the perispirit may be completely affected when the physical life stops completely. And the cohesion between the perispirit and the body, as he says, may be in full force at the very moment. And then the spirit is going to resent. And then, as he says, it's going to be painful. But, Kirsten, as you were just giving us a tip and hint, talking about more evolved worlds, the cohesion between the perispirit and the physical body differs according to the level of our evolution. It means if I am more evolved, more spiritual in my attitude in life, then less attached to the physical world, then I'll have an easier time in this transition. And sometimes people ask me, how will I know? Because sometimes, Kirsten, people think that they are that they are not attached. But then, we have some thermometers here that we can use in our day-to-day life to see how attached we are. For example, when we lose a job, how do we feel? Devastated? Or we take it like more lightly, thinking, well, it's not the end of the world. When I lose a loved one, quote unquote, because we don't lose anybody, how do I react? Is it the end of the world for me? Or do I take it with sadness, which is natural, but I keep on going? Or, for example, when I move to another location, when I travel and I leave loved ones elsewhere, how do I take it? Is it too hard for me? Do I get depressed? Because these reactions are possible signs of how I'm going to feel if I discarnate today. Because then I have signs that I am attached to too much to the physical world. What do you think about this, Kirsten?
I think these thoughts are really interesting, and as you're speaking, Vanessa, it reminds me so much of also what Joanna D'Angelo says in the book Existential Conflicts, that this fear of death actually manifests itself in other ways, in less subtle ways. For instance, when people become sick or get an illness, they become very fearful, and Joanna D'Angelo says it's an underlying issue that's more related to the fear of death. That if actually, she states that when people are very concerned about aging, it somehow actually is more related to the fact that deep down they have this fear of death. And she says it comes from many different things, fear of the unknown, fear of how to deal with it. But as you mentioned, you quoted one of the things she says in Happy Life. One way for us to prepare for death is just to think about it every day, to deal with it. So emotionally, it's not a shock for us. So when she talks about death, she talks about it in such a way that a lot of people are scared of it. So basically, it makes logical sense that if you constantly, emotionally and psychologically prepare yourself for something, once it happens, you're not so afraid of it. It's like when you have to move to a new city or your child is moving on to college, you are continuously thinking about it, preparing for it in your mind, so when the event does occur, you're already used to it. Maybe this man who died on that Brazilian radio show, perhaps he had contemplated death for quite a long time and was just accustomed to the idea, and it wasn't so scary as it is for us today, right?
Yes, you are so right. You are so right. And Kirsten, before we go to a break, I would like to stream a case from the book Heaven and Hell Part 2. It's quite interesting, as you know, but for the listener who is not familiar, read this book, Heaven and Hell, because Kardec, though the title seems not to be too invitational, but we assure you, here you have some of the best cases that really relate to our day-to-day life. Because Kardec, through mediums at the time, talked to different discarnate spirits, from those that he classified as happy spirits to spirits who were in a middling condition, suffering spirits, suicides, repentant criminals, spirits that were still obdurate, very hard in their hearts, difficult spirits, and spirits who underwent a terrestrial expiation. And amongst them, we're going to stream at least 2 or 3 today and talk a little bit about it, because we know probably at death cafes people will talk about things of the nature. We don't know, but if we were spiritists in the death cafe, we would probably talk about these things. So we're going to stream right now, which is a quite interesting case, the case of a spirit who discarnated, and he was a mentally disabled child. And you can find the whole chapter, including the explanations, Chapter 8, Part 2 of the Heaven and Hell book. Let us listen to this. It's quite short. And after that, we're going to discuss a little bit and then go for our first break.
Charles de Saint-G, mentally impaired. Parisian Society, 1860. Charles de Saint-G was a mentally impaired 13-year-old boy who was still living and whose intellectual faculties were so impaired that he could not even recognize his own parents. He could barely feed himself. He had experienced the complete developmental suspension of his entire organic system. To St. Louis.
Would you tell us if we could evoke this child spirit?
You can invoke him as if you were invoking the spirit of a deceased person.
Your response would seem to imply that we may evoke him at any time.
Yes, his soul is held to his body by physical ties, but not spiritual ones. It can free itself at any time.
Evocation of Charles de Saint-G.
I am a poor spirit, held to this earth like a bird tied down by one leg.
In your present state as a spirit, are you aware of your complete impairment in this world?
Of course, I feel my captivity very well.
While your body is sleeping and your spirit is free, do you have thoughts as lucid as if you were in a normal state?
While my unfortunate body rests, I am a bit freer to reach out towards the heaven to which I aspire.
While in the spirit state, do you experience any sensations of pain as a result of your corporeal state?
Yes, since it is a punishment.
Can you remember your previous existence?
Oh yes, it is the cause of my present exile.
What kind of existence was it?
That of an incorrigible young man during the reign of Henry III.
You said that your present condition is a punishment, so you didn't choose it?
No.
In your current state of impairment, how can your present life serve for your advancement?
My state is not an impairment before God, who imposed it on me.
Can you see how long your current existence will last?
No, but sooner or later I will return to my homeland.
What did you do as a spirit between your previous existence and your present incarnation?
God imprisoned me because I was a thoughtless spirit.
In your waking state, are you aware of what goes on around you despite of the imperfections of your organs?
I can see and hear, but my body neither understands nor perceives anything.
Could we do anything to help you?
Nothing. To St. Louis.
Could the prayers we say for incarnate spirit have the same effectiveness as for errant spirit?
Prayers are always good, and are agreeable to God. In this poor spirit's case, they do not do him any good at present, but they will serve him later. God will take them into account.
This evocation confirms what has always been said about the mentally impaired. The mental impairment does not correspond to the spirit impairment, regardless of the physical organs. The spirit enjoys all his faculties. The imperfection of the organs is only an obstacle to the free manifestation of thought. Thus, it is like a hale and hearty man whose limbs have been tied.
And dear listener, I want to make a correction here. This case actually is of a mentally disabled child who hasn't discarnated yet. And this is one of the interesting aspects of it, because it talks about life after life and how one choice of one life can actually be deciding on what's going to happen in the future life. So, Kirsten, in this case here, of course, he discarnated in a previous life, and now he's living this life. And he's, probably asleep in the physical body, and then he is evoked. So this is quite interesting because it talks about the possibility of evoking people who are incarnated. And sometimes people are not fully aware that this is a possibility. I recall we talked about Giacomini, who is the director of the Rede Boa Nova TV Mundo Maior, and both the radio station and the TV in Brazil, they are related to the Institute André Luiz in São Paulo, which is actually dedicated to taking care of disabled kids, mentally and physically disabled kids. I was there once, and I remember that he mentioned that in the disobsession meetings, they actually do this such practice that Kardec did. They ask the mentors the possibility of evoking the spirits of those children who are suffering so they can treat them, almost like in a spiritual counseling type of setting, trying to help them really close some emotional chapters in their life. So what do you think in general about this passage, Kirsten?
I think it's very revolutionary. It's a revolutionary idea, and that really, we hope, impresses upon people that we are much more than our physical body. So we don't have to fear aging or disease or people who have illnesses since birth. And sometimes there can be prejudices or false ideas about children that are born with disabilities that perhaps maybe they don't understand what's going on. So even in the healthcare field or in education, it can really change people's minds, educators' minds. So when you're speaking to someone, whether they're in a coma or they have a physical debilitation that doesn't allow them to communicate back, yet the immortal spirit that we all are is there and can hear us and can register what we're teaching them. So it's a new way also for us to look at life in a very grander perspective, that although, and something reminds us that we actually don't necessarily hear with our physical ears, but we hear with our immortal, with us, the immortal spirit. We hear it, thus we register it. So it's a great idea to be spread, I think, for that one little purpose, which isn't so little actually, of educating one another.
And you know, Kirsten, for those who want to know more about what happens to the spirit of those who are animating the body of mentally ill, mentally disabled people, this very chapter followed this dialogue between Kardec and the spirit. There is a dissertation on mentally disabled people, dictated actually by a spirit at the meeting of the Paris Society. And it's beautiful when the spirit, Pierre J., says, mentally disability is not one of the laws of God, and science will succeed in getting rid of them, for they are the result of ignorance, poverty, and dirt. The progress and generalization of physiological science and the improvement of hygienic conditions will gradually extirpate them. Progress being the inevitable destiny of mankind, the trials imposed on the human race will be modified and will follow the ascensional movement of coming ages, becoming in time altogether mental and moral. And when your earth still in its early youth shall have accomplished the initial phases of its career, it will cease to be a place of expiation and will become a sojourn of felicity, like the planets that have reached a more advanced stage of development. And then he goes on, talking about this spiritist view on mental disability. And here we talk about, as we are talking about life and death, how the connection, as he says, between the spirit and the physical body exists, but we are not restricted in the body. When we are at sleep, we are disengaged, semi-disengaged in some way. So here we have the understanding that what happens in one life, Kirsten, will be felt throughout the moment of death and then in the next life. And this reminds me of another case that we'll listen after the break, Kirsten. Max the beggar. And this goes also hand in hand with a recent headline news that happened in the Good News Network. I want to discuss as well about a case, a beautiful case that happened in Brazil, and how people in such conditions, beggars actually discarnate, and why they go through such experience, Kirsten. So after the break, we're going to discuss this with you and the listener as well, okay?
Okay.
We will return to our program after these messages.
New release, Liberation. In this compelling narrative, Andre Luiz emphasizes the work of high-order spirits in the effort to convert the spirit Gregorio to the good, an effort that culminates with the unforgettable re-encounter with his mother, herself a highly evolved spirit, wherein he surrenders to the irresistible call of love. The book also contains information on how unhappy spirits act as they try to involve incarnates in their wiles. The spirit author tells of the intercession of high-order spirits on behalf of human beings, demonstrating the divine compassion that grants to all the blessed opportunity to free themselves by means of study, labor, and persevering service in the practice of the good. Buy your copy today at www.ediceiofamerica.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Want Spiritist books for your children? At Eddie Save America, you will find a collection of them. From the best-selling book, Our Father, in which the Spirit May through Chico Xavier brought countless poems, stories, and folk tales based on the Lord's Prayer, to the beautiful and educational collection by the author Adelson Sales on Back to School and many others. Buy your copy today at www.eddiesaveamerica.com.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
If you missed out on previous shows, no worries. We have an on-demand sections of all previous shows and interviews. Go to our website, www.kardecradio.com.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Spiritism for Everyone is the live web study meeting and educational program of the United States Spiritist Council. This year, in commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the Gospel according to Spiritism, the Spiritism for Everyone program will present an in-depth study of this remarkable book. Join us every Wednesday evening through the web from any computer or mobile device, no matter where you are in the U.S. Spiritism for Everyone is free, open to all, and requires no registration. For more information, go to www.spiritist.us.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are talking about life and death, and for you who just got in, I would like to remind you that unfortunately John Underwood is not here with us today to talk about Death Cafe because we had some technical issues about the interview. He is located in England, but we are rescheduling the interview and we'll let you know. For the time being, I would like to share with you that we are starting a new campaign about the favorite passages of yours on the Gospel According to Spiritism, because we're celebrating 150 years of this amazing book, a book that has transformed lives. And we want to hear from you. What are your favorite passages and why? Kirsten and I have discussed about our favorite passages, and we asked Marcus DeClay from Canada, who is here with us. Thank you, Marcus. And he said that he actually has a favorite passage, and that's mine too, Marcus. It's about item 10 on chapter 17 of the Gospel. It talks about the individual in the world. A fascinating passage. And as Marcus says, from the Gospel, I always remember Paul of Tarsus in the Epistle of to the Philippians 1:30, when he speaks about the battle within each of us for leaving the old man behind to build a new man. And Chico Xavier psychographed a message by the Spirit Emmanuel, which elaborates on the topic on the book on Our Daily Bread, lesson 178. And you can buy both books, Our Daily Bread by Emmanuel and the Gospel According to Spiritism, at edisafamerica.com. And another passage that Marcus DeClay also likes is item 3 of the same chapter, Moral Persons, which is, as he says, a great inspiration to what we should and will be doing one day. Thank you so much, Marcus. Now we are here with our friend Kirsten DeMello talking about the passage to the spiritual realm, death as a whole. Kirsten, before the break, we were talking about the passage of a mentally disabled kid and her case being talked about in Kardec's book, The Heaven and Hell. In a previous life, this child was a person who was really frivolous and thoughtless regarding his everyday life. And then in the following life, he incarnates as a mentally disabled kid, feeling truly imprisoned in that physical body, which is quite difficult, right? Now we want to talk about the cases of people who beg in the streets. You live in Baltimore City, Kirsten. I used to live there as well. And we see cases of homeless each and every day. In Washington, D.C., Brazil, in so many places on the earth. And we ask, why? What is happening there? Only Spiritism would explain, right, Kirsten?
Absolutely. There's so many different explanations. I think each case is such a different, unique case, but it's thanks to Spiritism that really opens up our perspective so we don't look down on them as, people who should be excommunicated from our society, but rather we should really open up our minds and look at them as really as family in some way, shape, or form, and look at them from a more charitable perspective, right?
Yes, and as you're saying this, Kirsten, the case of people who become beggars and homeless are cases of such. I read this yesterday. And I would recommend that people go to Good News Network to read the story of a poet who wore plastic bags on the street until a kind stranger heard his dream. And I'll read a very excerpt that was written in the Good News Network. He lived on the same São Paulo street corner for 18 years. The black plastic bags wrapped around him and long tangled hair and beard protected him from the elements. Atop a small stool, this 75-year-old man could be seen every day, hunched over and writing. Though homeless for 34 years, Raimundo, Portuguese for Raymond, was very well read and loved to read. In April 2011, he was befriended by a young woman named Sheila Montero, who was impressed by his poetry and wanted to help him realize his dream of publishing a book of his mini pages, as he calls them. She created a Facebook page to feature the writings of Raimundo Arruda Sobrinho, who signed every poem with a nickname he gave himself, The Conditioned. Neither could have dreamed the happy outcome of what happened next when a special someone saw the Facebook photo. And the actuality is that his brother found him after 57 years and took him to their home in Goiás, Brazil, and living there now in his family setting. Now he's going to get his book published. It's fascinating, the whole story, Kirsten. And as you said, each and every case is one, but we just wonder why, what happened there. And the way he talks about never abandoning yourself. He says we should never abandon ourselves, no matter the circumstances. So who knows his story and why he came to this point of being homeless for 34 years and finally being rescued by someone whom he befriended. What do you think about this story, Kirsten?
I think it's absolutely amazing and inspirational. You never know what lies underneath the dirty hands or the apparent dirty hands or ragged clothes or beggars on the street. Truly, we never know. And if we kind of change our perspective to not think of them as, well, they are drug addicts, they're looking for something. You know, Vanessa, it kind of reminds us from a passage from one of the books that are not in English. It was psychographed by Divaldo Franco through various spirits. It's something, if it were to be translated into English, should be like emergency therapy, something like that. And basically, a spirit who is named Sister Shayla says that, you know, when we're in these circumstances where we pass someone on the street who is homeless, who's a beggar, we shouldn't judge. We should just help, and God will take care of the rest. But it's very interesting because we have a lot of ideas that aren't so positive about people who are begging on the street. We have a lot of preconceived notions, but this is so inspiring for us when they broadcast news like this, because it makes us think about the possibilities of what we could do and what we should do, really.
Exactly. And Kirsten, you talked about Divaldo Franco. We want to remind people that he's coming back to the United States, and he's going to be on March 8th and 9th in Miami, Florida for 2 days with other speakers, including Kirsten and I, and Daniel Assisi and Susana Simões, an event that is organized by the Spiritist Federation of Florida, and it's going to happen at the Florida International University at the Covens Conference Center in North Miami, Florida. If you want more information, just go to the webpage of the Spiritist Federation of Florida or talk to Andrea Marshall at 786-519-3529. It's about the tribute to the 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. It's Spiritism in the New Era, something really not to miss. And other events we will announce also. It's Divaldo Franco in Washington, D.C. on March the 27th, something not to miss, because we're going to talk about how life can be really transformed when we work in a charitable way. Dr. Post and Divaldo Franco will lead a beautiful conversation about this very topic that is life transforming. And soon after, he's going to be in New Jersey, New York, Boston. Don't miss it. And if you want to know more about the event, just write a line to us, drop a line at kardecradio@gmail.com. Kirsten, as we were talking about the people behind homelessness, let us just listen to this case that Kardec unfolds in the Heaven and Hell book, Chapter 8, Max the Beggar, and then we'll discuss it, okay?
Absolutely.
From the book Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec, Max the Beggar. In a Bavarian village around the year 1850, an old man, known as Father Max, died at nearly 100 years of age. No one really knew where he came from, for he had no family. For around half a century, stricken by infirmities that rendered him unable to earn a living, he had no other resources but public charity, which he had disguised by selling almanacs and other trinkets among the farmhouses and castles. He was given the nickname Count Max, and children addressed him only by that title, which made him smile without taking offense. Why this title? No one knew, but custom had sanctioned it. Perhaps it was on account of his appearance and manners, whose refinement contrasted with his rags. Many years after his death, Max appeared in a dream to the daughter of the owner of one of the castles, where he had been allowed to lodge in for the stable, for he had no place of residence. He said to her, "Thank you. Thank you for having remembered poor Max in your prayers, for the Lord has heard them. You are a charitable soul who has taken an interest in an unfortunate beggar, and you would like to know who I was. I will satisfy your wish. It will be the greatest instruction to all." Then he gave the following account in roughly these terms. About a century and a half ago, I was rich and a powerful lord in this region, but I was vain, proud, and infatuated with my nobility. I never used my huge fortune for anything but to satisfy my pleasures. My fortune was barely enough, for I was a gambler and a reckless individual, and spent my life in orgies. My vassals, whom I deemed worthy of being used like farm animals, were exploited and mistreated to provide my extravagances. I remained deaf to their complaints, as was the case with all their unfortunate beings who, in my opinion, ought to consider themselves very honored at my satisfying whims. I died at a young age, exhausted by my excess, but without having truly experienced any real misfortune. On the contrary, everything seemed to smile on me to such a degree that I passed as one of the most favored beings on earth. My social position entitled me to a lavish funeral, but not a tear was shed at my tomb, nor a heartfelt prayer said to God on my behalf, and my memory was cursed by all those whose misery I had contributed to. How terrible it was, the curse of the unfortunate beings whom once had harmed. The curse never ceased ringing through my ears throughout the long years that seemed like an eternity. And after the death of one of my victims, there was a new threatening or sarcastic face appearing before me to hound me without respite, and without my being able to be in a dark corner in which to hide from its sight. Not one friendly glance. My old companions in the debauchery, as unhappy as I was, fled from me, and seemed to say in scorn, "You no longer pay for our pleasures." Oh, what I would have paid for in a moment of repose, for a glass of water to quench my burning thirst that devoured me. But I did not possess anything anymore, and all the gold that I had scattered with my handfuls upon the earth didn't produce a single blessing, not one. You see, my child, finally, overcome by fatigue, exhausted like a weary traveler who could not foresee the end of his journey, I cried, "My God, have mercy on me. When will this excruciating situation end?" Then a voice came, the first that I heard after having left on earth, said to me, "When you will it." "What must I do, great God?" I replied. "Please tell me. I will submit myself to anything." "You must repent, my son. You must humble yourself before those whom you humiliated. Ask them to pray for you. For the prayer of the offended who forgive is always pleasing to the Lord." So I humbled myself, and I begged for forgiveness of my vassals and my servants. They appeared before me, their faces little by little becoming more kindly, and finally disappearing altogether. It was as if I had become granted a new life. Desperation gave many ways to hope as I was thankful to my God. With all the strength in my soul, the voice added, "Prince," to which I responded, "There is no other prince here but the Almighty God, who humbles the haughty. Forgive me, Lord, for I have sinned. And if it is your will, make me the servant of my servants." A few years later, I was born once more, but this time into the family of poor villagers. My parents died while I was still a child, and I was alone and without help in the world. I made a living however I could, sometimes as a farmhand, or sometimes as a workman, but always honestly, because I believed in God this time. At the age of 40, an illness befell me and rendered me completely crippled, and I had to beg for more than 50 years in the same lands over which I had been an absolute lord. I was happy to receive a morsel of bread on the farms that I had once possessed, and where, by Biddy Arity, I had been given the nickname of Count Max. I was very fortunate to often find shelter in the stables of the very castle that had once been mine. While I slept, I took pleasure in roaming the same castle where I had reigned as a despot. How many times in my dreams I saw myself and missed my old fortune. Upon waking, such visions left me with an undefined feeling of bitterness and sadness, but not one complaint ever escaped my lips. And when it pleased God to call me to Him, I praised Him for having given me the courage to undergo without complaint such a long and painful trial, for which today I have received my reward. As for you, my child, I bless you for having prayed for me.
So here we have Max the beggar, or Count Max, as they say. And you can read the whole passage on chapter 8, part 2 of the Heaven and Hell book by Kardec. Kirsten, what are your thoughts regarding this case, please?
Oh, we have so many thoughts on this case. Much like a lot of the things in Heaven and Hell, a lot of the stories, we could really use it as some form of a framework for our lives, because on one hand, we could see a different and new way we can look at one another. We can look at it from a perspective as the immortal soul, and also we can look at it from the perspective that, you know, in one life we may be born rich, in other lives we may be born poor, but also from this idea, sometimes when we see people suffering, we oftentimes think, perhaps as spiritists, we might have this idea, or as Christians as well, or whatever other religious affiliation we attribute ourselves to, we might think, well, they're supposed to go through that, so we retract and say they have to have their experience, or sometimes we're on the opposite extreme, and we think that we have to be somebody's savior. So there's different ideas around it, although the idea is really to be balanced, because we cannot, and we are not, people's saviors, but rather we are just here to really just serve one another. And I believe it's also in the Gospel, it talks about, in the beginning first 5 chapters or so, it talks about this idea that we are here to simply help alleviate the pain of others, not to take away their lesson, but just to alleviate the pain. So when you have a broken leg, I can't cast it for you, or I can't fix the bone, but I can offer you some medicine, some Tylenol, some Motrin, or maybe something more stronger. But the idea is just to really alleviate one another's pain, because ultimately we have to endure that experience. But sometimes we think, well, we try to figure out what our role is. You know, if we take this story and utilize it in other areas of life, sometimes people get lost in, well, how am I supposed to be charitable? How much is too much in giving? And reality, like the message I talked about from Sister Shayla, she just says we should just help, just alleviate, like the Gospel says, just help to alleviate that person and let God worry about the rest. And ultimately, it will work itself out. We just need to do our part. Even if it's just praying like this girl did. If it's just praying for someone, prayer is a huge help, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And as we're talking about this passage in the Heaven and Hell book, it correlates to a passage in the Gospel that Murilo Soranzo, hey Murilo, thank you for sending your favorite passage of the Gospel. He says his favorite passage is on chapter 2 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, as he says, my kingdom is not of this world, in the Spirit's teaching from the Queen of France, and he quotes something that goes hand in hand with the case we're discussing. I was a queen amongst men. As a queen, I thought I would enter the kingdom of heaven. Such a delusion, such humiliation when instead of being received as a sovereign, I saw above me, far above me, beings whom I had deemed quite small and whom I despised because they were not of noble blood. It's amazing, Kirsten, because we have these illusions in our minds, and as the Count Max Case says, he was noble in terms of the material possessions, but not in the heart. He had an enormous wealth, but he only employed for his pleasures. And here we have, Kirsten, a reminder for us as the north of the compass for our lives. Selfishness is a big no-no, because the things we have in our lives are concessions of God. They are not for us to use for ourselves alone. So it reminds me of Chico Xavier's attitude in life. You know, whatever he would have, he would share with everyone without any doubt and any hesitation. And this would be a life-saving procedure, because it would save a lot of problems, not only in this life, but in future lives as well. And I don't want to be too controversial, but the other day, Carlos and I were watching the movie Steve Jobs, and really, there in that movie, Steve Jobs, it talks so much about the genius in one hand, but so much selfishness and pride on the other hand, that without judgment of the person, but just the behavior in itself, that makes us think about, the continuity of life and how much we're going to regret later if we keep ourselves encapsulated in selfishness and pride. Right, Kirsten?
Absolutely. And really, Vanessa, that movie was very interesting, and it makes us think about why certain people are repulsed by death, why they are afraid of it, why they choose to really sort of push it way down deep within them, and why the idea of reincarnation people also are afraid of. Because death and reincarnation, this idea of coming back or leaving behind all our material possessions, is very scary, and perhaps we don't realize the depths of the materialist idea that is still embedded in a lot of humanity, because there is this huge fear of death because of this materialist idea that we are still very much attached, especially when we are in high positions or we obtain things such as material wealth, or just we have progressed so much in our career, we have so many assets, so we are afraid to relinquish that. And there are so many problems that derive from that, whether it's through our children who we leave behind as we pass on because we don't teach them how to deal with things, Vanessa. And if I may just mention very briefly this really interesting idea that Joanna DeAndres brings to us in the book Existential Conflict. In the last chapter that's entitled Death, she mentions, and we are sort of paraphrasing her words and extracting from that a really renovating idea, and she says that, in education, we study about different civilizations, we study about social, cultural, economic matters, but she tells us that we need to implement a program or implement into our agenda this increased awareness about death. And she actually says that many evils can be avoided when a conscious program for death is established. So that's interesting, because we were reflecting about, wow, how do we even begin to create a program to prepare people, a conscious program for death, so people aren't as afraid? It's interesting because it's sort of an outbranching of her book, Happy Life, when she says, let's think about death every day, but really creating a program or implementing to already existing programs, perhaps in our Spiritist centers or whatever other curriculum we're dealing with, somehow bringing to light this idea of immortality or even the possibility, right?
Oh yes, that's a good point, Kirsten. And as we are marching to the closure of our program today, talking about death and how natural we should make this conversation be in our everyday lives, preparing ourselves, as you said, like programming ourselves in such a way. Like the man we talked at the very beginning, God bless his heart, whatever he is in the spiritual realm, the spiritist philosopher who died on air 2 days ago at Rádio Boa Nova, TV Mundo Maior in Brazil. He probably programmed himself in such a way that, he could even announce, "Oh, I'm going up," and boom, his head fell down very slowly, and he discarnated. It's interesting, and God bless his heart for being a reason for us to meditate about death and life. So, Kirsten, what would you like to share with the listener at Kardec Radio as your final comment today regarding these discussions of death and how important it is to make it a natural thing?
I would say the idea is that I would like to go out like that man did. I would like just to be in such a place, and I hope that I wish that for others, that they could reach a state in their lives where they know when they are going to pass on and let go of this physical body to the other life, that they be that comfortable with the idea of physical death and rebirth back into the spiritual realm, that the final message would be that, for us to imagine reaching that state of mind where we are so much at peace with ourselves, with the world around us, and with all things, that we can let go that easily, and also be an example for other people. That's what I would leave the program with today.
Wonderful. Kirsten, we thank you so much for being with us and in this such short notice, and for bringing so many uplifting ideas for us. Thank you so much, Kirsten.
Thank you.
Now, dear listener, as we mentioned, when we talk about Death Cafe, and we'll have John Underwood soon joining us at Kardec Radio, the idea is such that we get together to talk about it with naturality. And the Heaven and Hell book by Kardec is a great resource. We would recommend sit down with your kids, with your spouse, with your friends. Take the Heaven and Hell book. Read some of these dialogues between Kardec and the spirits who discarnated. It's not morbid. It's not creepy. On the contrary, it's about life. We prepare ourselves to live better when we discuss this. Just like the cases we discussed. Max the beggar, Charles, and it talks about life. It's so interesting, and it makes us think about our everyday lives. So that's a good tip for you, dear listener. For all of us, oftentimes I do this with my husband. I sit down, eat something, and then I have the book, open a passage, read a dialogue, and we discuss a little bit because it's so intriguing. It's, as we said before in previous shows, these cases in the Heaven and Hell book are like reality show of the spirits for us, though they are not doing this for entertainment, but it's an opportunity for us for a healthy expenditure of our time with loved ones, exercising this thinking of life and death and its continuity, raising awareness about who we are, who we truly are, spirits. So how about if right now we end this program praying together? As Kirsten de Mello said at the beginning, prayer is everything. It really makes a difference. And we would recommend, when we hear in the news famous people who are discarnating or stories of tragic death, etc., pray for them, dear listener, because they are brothers and sisters of ours. Pray for them. As we said before, when we watch this news, we can add to this movement, even if they are sad news. Send a prayer to those who are in those sad news. It's a way to counterbalance. So right now, let us raise our thoughts and our feelings. Dear Mother, Father God, we are truly grateful for your mercy, for these lessons that are immortal, which guide our lives, helping us stand up again when we have fallen, and keep on marching when we are in the right track. We thank you for all those men and women in both realms of life, spirits and incarnate beings, who inspire us in our best potential, who encourage us to be the best we can be, because there is no limit to it, as you have created us. May we blossom in our co-creating abilities by knowing that we should not actually expect life to be what it is, but to improve it always. To always allow the creativity inside of us to blossom and touch the lives of those whom we encounter. Let us never be afraid, dear Lord. Help us so we are never afraid of walking an extra mile to those who are in need. And may those who are dying at this very moment receive our thoughts and feelings of solidarity, knowing that they are loved no matter the circumstances. They have loving hands receiving them in the spiritual life. And so be it. Dear listener, we are very thankful that you are sending your comments and your favorite passages of the Gospel according to Spiritism. Start this campaign wherever you are in Spiritist centers. Ask the people in your center to share their stories. How this book, The Gospel According to Spiritism, is transforming lives, and which favorite passages they have. Why not? Share this news with the listeners of Kardec Radio, with those who are in your life. Share and see how much this book can really transform, because it's more than life and death. It's about God. God, the supreme intelligence of the universe, first cause of all things. May our thoughts, actions, feelings, and words be always a tribute to God, our loving Creator and Father. This is it for today. In a week from today, we'll be back here with Geraldo Lemos Neto, a Spiritist calling father of the Casa of Chico Xavier. He's going to be back at Kardec Radio to talk about something that is unprecedented. André Louis' works from the perspective of Emmanuel and Neo Lucio. Something you probably haven't heard before, because it's going to be published in a book. And he's going to be here with us telling us this and much more. This is it for today, dear listener. We hope you keep feeling the blessings of God and keep co-creating to your best.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.